Welcome, traveler of time and seeker of rest. Before we wander too far into the dim corridors of the past, take a moment. Dim the lights around you. Perhaps switch on a fan for that gentle hum that keeps the room feeling steady. Nestle into your pillow. This is your little fortress against the chaos of history. As always, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what you hear. No obligations, no medieval-style tithes required. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're listening from and what time the clock shows in your corner of the world. And now, let's drift back. Open your eyes in the middle of the 14th century, and something hangs heavy in the air. A silence, a dread. The Black Death is here, and you are about to walk the crooked streets of its memory. You wake up to a village that feels both familiar and unmoored, as if someone has gently shifted the horizon while you slept. The air is cool and damp, carrying the faint tang of wood smoke from hearths that are either long abandoned or burning more out of habit than warmth. Birds peck nervously in the dust, and chickens scratch at the ground with half-hearted effort, as though the usual rhythm of farm life has been muted. You notice the quiet first, a hush that rests over rooftops and narrow lanes, broken only by the occasional creak of a door swinging in the breeze. As you step out, the cobblestones are slick with morning dew. The smell of earth mixed with something sharper or almost metallic drifts from alleyways. A few villagers move about, their faces pale and drawn, eyes darting to doors as if they expect something unpleasant to leap from the shadows. You realize some homes stand empty, windows shuttered, smoke absent from chimneys. The stillness is profound, not the calm of peace, but the anxious pause of a town holding its breath.
Nice.
In this fragile silence, you can almost hear the hum of invisible life fleas, rats, and germs traveling with a patience you would prefer not to notice. People pass by with murmured greetings, voices hushed and wary. Conversations are clipped, words carefully chosen to avoid triggering fear or suspicion.
Oh.
A mother tugs her child close as you pass, casting you a sideways glance that seems to ask whether you are a friend, stranger, or a potential carrier of misfortune. And yet, there is resilience here too. In the way the baker continues to light his oven, in the smith hammering faintly on iron as sparks fly into the early sun, life presses forward cautiously, but it presses nonetheless. You wander to the village well, the center of communal life in any ordinary day. Normally, children would crowd around the edge, dipping buckets and laughing. Now, the well sits quiet, its stones slick with algae and shadowed by overhanging branches. Two figures stand nearby, speaking in whispers that dissolve into the cold air before you can catch the words. One looks up at you, then quickly returns his gaze to the ground, as if acknowledging your presence would somehow summon calamity. Water flows as usual from the bucket, but it feels heavy, as though carrying the weight of the town's anxiety. If you think the village is silent because everyone has stopped moving, wait a moment. You notice the subtle signs. A door cracked open, revealing hastily stacked belongings. A cloak draped over a chair that no one will return to wear. The faint scent of unwashed linens in the cool morning. Each of these small details tells a story of absence and uncertainty, a narrative more powerful than any bell or herald. Here in the quiet dawn, you begin to understand the pervasive unease that the plague brings, even before its physical toll is fully visible. You wander further, past the church with its doors slightly ajar. A candle flickers inside, though the air smells faintly of incense that has long since burned down. The priest, normally a figure of authority and calm, moves with a measured caution, stopping to bless each doorway with a quick gesture. As if testing whether the unseen presence of sickness has passed him by, parishioners huddle in small groups outside, hesitant to enter, their whispered prayers tinged with the knowledge that proximity can be dangerous, that faith alone might not suffice. As the day slowly brightens, shadows stretch across the town square. You notice rats darting along walls, moving with purpose and urgency, carrying with them an invisible, creeping menace. The sight is almost banal, part of the background rhythm of village life. Yet under the lens of this uneasy dawn, it carries a quiet forewarning. And as you trace the path from the well to the edge of the fields, you sense the connection between this hushed village and the wider world. The ships arriving from distant ports carrying not just goods and news, but the first tendrils of the sickness that will soon ripple through Europe. This uneasy dawn is not merely a moment of time, it is the prelude to the days that follow, a subtle signal that the ordinary cadence of life has been disrupted. You carry this awareness in your chest like a small weight, a gentle insistence that even in quiet there is anticipation, even in stillness there is motion. And as you take your next step toward the heart of the village, you notice the first stirrings of response, small acts of caution and survival that will shape the coming days, quietly threading the story that will unfold around you. From here, the village hums with latent tension, and you begin to notice the subtle marks of arrival, the first whispers of the ships, the strange pallor of sailors, and the slow awareness that the world is about to tilt. Your attention drifts toward the horizon where commerce and contagion meet, and the day's uneasy rhythm begins to pulse in time with the broader invisible tide. You walk toward the harbor, the cobblestones turning slick beneath your feet from the morning mist. The air smells faintly of salt and seaweed, mixed with smoke from the few chimneys that still billow thin, gray wisps. Ships lean gently against their moorings, sails slack and ropes coiling like sleeping snakes. The harbor should feel alive with the clatter of unloading goods, the shouts of sailors, and the creak of wood. But today it feels paused, as if the very water is holding its breath. You notice small shapes darting along the plank strats, nimble and unafraid, carrying themselves as though they own the docks. A ship from the east glides in, its sails worn and patched. You watch the sailors stumble ashore, their clothes clinging damply to their bodies, faces pale and hollowed by exhaustion. Some lean on one another for support, others rest against crates and barrels, eyes unfocused, hands trembling. There's a strange odor that lingers: salt, sweat, and something faintly metallic that prickles at the back of your throat. It's subtle, yet unmistakable. Sickness is near. You can almost sense it moving in invisible swirls around the masts and rigging. You hear the merchants at the edge of the dock whispering hurriedly, glances darting between ships and the town beyond. "They've brought it," one says under his breath. Another shakes his head. The murmurs ripple through the crowd, a quiet panic hidden beneath attempts at casual conversation. The plague, you realize, travels not just by foot, but by rat, flea, and ship, arriving quietly on a tide of commerce and human ambition. You notice crates of textiles, barrels of grain, and sacks of flour, all seemingly mundane, yet each a potential host for invisible terror. The sailors, too weak to speak much, shuffle past you with uncertain steps. One coughs once, sharply, and the sound echoes along the dock. You catch the worried glance of a nearby merchant who quickly looks away, tugging a child closer. The interplay of fear and denial as delicate people want to act. Yet many hope that the danger is exaggerated, that it will skip over them as it seems to skip over the pigeons circling the masts. You feel the tension in the air as palpable as the briny mist clinging to your skin. From the harbor, your eyes drift to the town beyond. The ships are like silent messengers, bringing more than spices and silks. They carry the beginnings of something inexorable. You notice the subtle changes already: shuttered windows, quieter streets, the wary movements of those who recognize danger before it announces itself. And yet life attempts to continue. A fisherman untangles nets, children peek from behind barrels, and the occasional dog trots along, tail low but wagging faintly. The world is not frozen entirely, just rearranged by an invisible hand. In a quieter corner of the dock, you notice a rat slip past a sailor's boot, its fur slick with sea spray. It pauses for a moment, whiskers twitching, then disappears into a stack of crates. You understand, in a low, sinking way, that this small creature carries far more significance than its size would suggest. Fleas aboard these ships are tiny heralds of a plague that will move faster than armies or royal decrees. From here, the story of the Black Death begins to weave itself into villages, towns, and cities alike, touching every doorstep with a quiet, impartial hand. As you linger on the pier, watching ropes creak and sails flap in a timid breeze, you notice the subtle rhythm of human activity: sailors exchanging nods, a merchant balancing a scale, a child chasing a stray feather. Life insists on moving forward, even when shadowed by dread. It is in these small movements, these almost mundane acts, that the first glimpses of survival emerge. People will react, improvise, and adapt, even as the plague approaches silently from the horizon. From the ships, You can trace the path of arrival through streets that will soon feel eerily empty. Through homes where straw beds and unwashed linens await unsuspecting occupants. The docks are the threshold, and stepping past them, you follow the tide of change into the interior of villages and towns. Into kitchens, courtyards, and crowded homes, where the early signs of the plague are just beginning to manifest. Detail the shuffling sailor, the twitching rat, the whispering merchant threads together to form the opening scene of a calamity that will alter the course of Europe. And so, as the fog rises off the harbor and the ships settle into their moorings, you sense that the world you knew is subtly, irrevocably shifting. From here, your path leads inward, to the narrow lanes and crowded homes where daily life will encounter the first tremors of fear, loss, and survival. The stage is set for the village to confront the unseen tide. You step into a typical medieval house, and the first thing that hits you is the warmth, but not the comforting kind. It's thick, heavy with smoke from the hearth, mingled with the faint temps of unwashed wool and dried sweat. The interior is dim, the sunlight barely filtering through small grime-coated windows. You notice the straw mats on the floor, flattened and threadbare, serving as both beds and chairs. Children crawl between adults, their bare feet brushing against cold, hard boards. The walls, made of timber and plaster, are uneven, and the corners are home to shadows that seem to linger just a second too long. You realize quickly that privacy is a forgotten notion here. A single room often houses grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes a pig or a goat tucked in a corner for warmth. Bedding is minimal, often nothing more than a few straw-filled sacks covered with fraying wool. They move silently, but insistently, across skin and fabric. Congratulations! Your bed now comes with free fleas. It is a daily negotiation with discomfort. A tactile reminder that life in these walls is survival, not luxury. Despite the chaos, there is a rhythm to the household. The cook, usually the mother or eldest daughter, moves deftly between a small fire and a battered table, slicing bread that is more crust than crumb, and stirring pottage that smells faintly of onion and overcooked grain. You notice the faint temps of smoke clinging to everything, giving the food a flavor of the hearth itself. Children tug at skirts or leap over one another, squealing with sudden energy, oblivious to the invisible threat that hangs in the air. You watch the small domestic dances, the careful balancing of chores. Play in survival land, you feel a quiet admiration for the household's stubborn perseverance. And yet, danger lurks in these routines. Rats scuttle along the floorboards, eyes bright and unafraid. They slip under the hearth, vanish behind cupboards, and occasionally, if you're unlucky, brush past a foot. Fleas hop along their backs and onto any available human host. One bite and illness can spread like wildfire through the narrow, crowded space. You note how subtle and patient this invasion is. The house itself seems to hum with an invisible life, crawling along walls, floating in dust motes, hidden in straw. Visitors are rare, and when they do appear, they bring a mix of hope and anxiety. A neighbor might offer a few eggs or a scrap of cheese, but even a friendly presence carries the potential for danger. Hands are washed quickly in a basin of cool water, not from habit but necessity. Words are spoken quietly, often punctuated with cautious glances toward the corners of the room. Everyone knows, even in the absence of understanding, that proximity can be perilous. The social contract of community is tested with every breath, every handshake, every shared piece of bread. In one corner, an elder coughs softly, and you notice the sudden hush that follows. Children pause mid-play, the cook straightens, and even the family dog tilts its head. It's a minor gesture, but in this space, small things carry heavy weight. Life is lived in micro-decisions. When to touch, when to avoid, when to eat, when to pray. Survival is as much about intuition as it is about hard labor. You wander toward the hearth and feel the warmth radiate unevenly. One side of the room is lit by the small fire, the other cloaked in shadow, a place where illness can hide unnoticed. Smoke curls into your eyes, and the smell of charred wood mixes with the faintly sour odor of damp straw. It's not unpleasant, exactly just a reminder that the house is a living organism in itself, breathing with the presence of humans, animals, and pests alike. And yet, even amid these crowded conditions, life insists on slipping through. Children laugh, women hum while stirring, Men mutter prayers or softly recount tasks for the day. The house, though cramped and infested, is full of resilience. You realize that these moments, small and seemingly mundane, threads of survival that will stretch across centuries, even as the shadow of plague grows just outside. From the warmth and clutter of this home, your gaze eventually shifts outward, toward the town's edges. You notice the silent streets, the hushed marketplace, and the watchful eyes of those trying to protect themselves. The disease does not respect walls, and soon, the struggle of this single household becomes part of a broader, unsettling rhythm of life and death that will echo through the streets and fields alike. And so, from the crowded home, you step toward the labor and rituals that define daily life under the quiet, but persistent shadow of the plague, ready to follow its invisible path deeper into the village. You follow a narrow, muddy path out of the village and toward the edge of the cemetery, where the air carries a different weight, heavier, earthy, and faintly metallic. The smell of damp soil is punctuated by a tang you cannot place, a quiet, stubborn presence that clings to your clothes and hair. The graves are uneven, dug in haste, mounds of dirt heaped in irregular piles. You notice the solemn rhythm of the gravediggers as they move through their work, shovels slicing the soil with a kind of methodical patience. Their faces are sunburnt and lined, eyes set in concentration that borders on meditation, though you sense a persistent fatigue behind it. You watch as a man leans into the earth, muscles straining, boots sinking slightly into the mud. Every movement is deliberate, precise, as if a single misstep could compromise the fragile order he maintains. Around him, the cemetery is busy in its own grim way. Other gravedigger stacks timber for simple coffins. Boy carries water for the workers, and a small group arranges bodies with quiet efficiency. There is no hurry, not in the usual sense. But a tension hums beneath the surface. The work must be done, the dead cannot wait. The silence here is profound, broken only by the muted scrape of wood and the dull thud of soil returning to the ground. Birds circle overhead uneasy, their calls clipped and brief, as if they too sense the heaviness of the place. You notice the subtle sounds of life continuing nearby, a dog barking in the distance, the faint chatter of villagers from the town, a wind that lifts the scent of damp earth and carries it across the graves. The contrast is stark. Death concentrated in one space, life sprawling quietly around it, unaware or unwilling to pause entirely. The gravediggers speak little, but when they do, their voices are low and practical. A comment on the depth of a grave, a quick question about where to place the next body, the occasional remark about the weather or the stubbornness of the soil. You realize that conversation is almost a luxury here. Their focus must remain on rhythm, precision, and endurance. Even humor is muted, slipping in quietly through dry, ironic asides, a shared glance at a crooked mound of earth, a whispered joke about whose turn it will be to carry the next body. You notice that the work itself has a strange cadence. There is a repetition that is almost hypnotic. Dig, stack, lower cover, repeat. Watching it, you find your own breath slowing, sinking faintly with the rhythm of labor. The gravediggers' bodies move in time with the earth, their movements both fluid and constrained. Mindful of the weight they carry, both physical and symbolic. Each grave is a marker not just of death but of endurance, a reminder of the tenuous boundary between life and the invisible force sweeping through the village. Despite the somber nature of the task, there is a kind of quiet pride in the work. The gravediggers honor the dead with care, stacking the coffins neatly, covering mounds evenly, and ensuring that markers are placed where possible. You can see the subtle gestures of respect. A cross carved hastily into wood, hand pressed briefly over a mound, a murmured blessing that slips into the soil itself. Even amid tragedy, human rituals persist, weaving small threads of dignity into a world fraying at the edges. You take a step back and survey the cemetery. Mounds rise and fall like gentle waves frozen in place. You notice how the workers navigate around the fresh graves, careful not to disturb those recently buried. The place is simultaneously chaotic and orderly, an ecosystem of grief, labor, and resilience. You sense that the work here is as much about protecting the living as honoring the dead. Each grave prevents the spread of something far more insidious than mere absence. As the afternoon light shifts, shadows stretch across the graves, elongating the mounds and giving the scene a dreamlike quality. You feel the subtle pull of the village beyond the smells of cooking, the faint laughter of children, the movement of villagers trying to maintain routine in a world increasingly unsettled. The gravediggers, though, remain tethered to their labor, their focus a bridge between the tangible weight of the earth and the invisible currents of fear and survival swirling through the town. From here, your attention begins to drift back toward the village, toward the streets where everyday life persists under the quiet pressure of mortality. The cemetery, with its rhythm and ritual, marks the first tangible encounter with the plague's consequences. A reminder that death is both laborious and intimate, deeply woven into the fabric of this world. And as you leave the edge of the graves, you notice the small signs of coping among villagers, the way bread is rationed, water filtered, and doors kept closed, subtle preparations that hint at the broader struggle to come. You walk back toward the center of the village, and the first thing you notice is the sound low, steady, and unyielding.
Well, it's all close.
Another soul claimed by the invisible tide sweeping through your streets. The sound carries differently here. It's bouncing off timber-framed homes and narrow alleyways. It's filling spaces that might otherwise have been full of chatter, laughter, or the clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Each toll is measured, deliberate, almost hypnotic, a rhythm that insists you acknowledge mortality without words. The air is heavy with a mix of smells: smoke from cooking fires, damp wood, and a faint metallic temps that you sense more than see. Villagers pause in their errands as the bells chime, heads bowed instinctively, hands clutching cloaks or scarves as if shielding themselves from more than the cold. You feel a peculiar, quiet descend over the market square. Shoppers move more slowly, merchants speak in clipped tones. Children tread softly beside their parents, almost sensing that the cadence of the bells is a language all its own. The sound presses against your chest, steady and inescapable, a reminder of the fragility of the life threading through these streets. As you wander past stalls, the usual vibrancy of the market feels muted. Barrels of grain, baskets of apples, and bundles of firewood are arranged with care, yet no one lingers. The tolling discourages idle chatter. Even the animals seem subdued. Chickens cluck softly, ducks huddle in corners, and the village dog wanders slowly between carts, tail lowered. You notice how each villager's body responds: slight stoops, slower steps, a pause before speaking. Life continues, yes, but it carries a new weight. One measured not in coin or goods, but in the intervals between chimes. In the recognition that each bell represents an absence that cannot be filled. Inside the church, you glimpse a few parishioners, seated on worn benches, hands clasped tightly, eyes closed or fixed on the altar. A thin wisp of incense curls toward the rafters, mingling with the smell of candle wax and dust. The priest moves quietly between pews, murmuring blessings that are almost lost under the tolling. Even here, the routine of faith feels fragile, like a thin thread stretched over a vast, yawning gap of uncertainty. You sense that the bells are both a call to prayer and a warning, a rhythm that cannot be ignored, shaping the behavior of everyone who hears it. Outside, you notice that the tolling has begun to dictate more than pauses for prayer. Work is adjusted to the cadence of loss. Bakers pull bread from ovens just as a bell strikes. Delivery boys shuffle bundles across cobblestones, time to chimes, and farmers pause mid-hoe, eyes toward the spire. Silently noting another soul claimed, there is a strange, hypnotic order to it, a way of channeling grief into movement, of giving structure to what feels otherwise chaotic. You find yourself, too, moving in step with the rhythm, your own breathing echoing the measured swing of the iron clapper. And yet, beneath the ritual, there is unease. Not everyone responds with solemnity. Some glance nervously at neighbors, calculating distance, gauging the spread of sickness, adjusting instinctively to protect themselves. The tolling has become both a marker of time and an indicator of risk. You notice small behaviors. Doors are latched quickly, hands wiped on cloth, whispers clipped before they can escape. The bells, for all their ceremonial weight, also serve as an omnipresent reminder that the invisible threat moves with quiet patience. You wander past the market square toward the outer lanes, and the sound follows you. Echoing between buildings, lingering in the corners of alleys, you feel the way it shapes the village, turning each street and doorway into a theater of cautious interaction. Even those attempting normal routines, the barber, the candle maker, the potter, carry themselves differently, measured by the pull of each toll. Children learn quickly. When the bells strike, they lower voices, stop mid-play, or huddle close to their mothers. The rhythm becomes a language, instructing behavior, teaching attention, and framing the day around absence as much as presence. As dusk begins to fall, the bells continue their measured insistence. Shadows stretch across walls, and the orange glow of hearth fires flickers in windows. You sense the town settling into a fragile equilibrium, guided by the persistent sound that weaves together life, death, and anticipation. The tolling does not stop. It cannot. And in that continuous hum, you recognize a strange blend of grief, discipline, and endurance, a ritual that will carry the village through days both ordinary and extraordinary, shaping responses to the unseen forces at work. From the echoing chimes, your attention begins to drift toward the quiet streets, the narrow homes, and the distant hum of human activity, preparing you to witness how villagers negotiate daily survival under the omnipresent shadow of the plague. The tolling bells have set the stage, and every step forward is guided by the rhythm of loss. You find yourself walking along the edge of the village, where the road narrows and the cobblestones give way to dirt paths rutted with wagon wheels. The air is quieter here, though not empty. There is a soft susurration of leaves, the occasional lowing of a distant cow, and the gentle murmur of the wind brushing across the open fields. Along this path, you notice a lone figure kneeling on the edge of the road, a pilgrim in threadbare robes, hands clasped tightly around a weathered staff. His face is drawn, eyes hooded, yet there is a quiet intensity in the way he prays, a rhythm to his devotion that seems to echo the tolling bells from the village behind you. The pilgrim's lips move soundlessly at first, a whisper of hope or fear, till the words begin to take shape in the cool air. He is pleading, not just for himself, but for an unseen multitude. A litany for protection, for mercy, for the sick and dying he has passed along the way. The scent of herbs tied around his waist mixes with the faintly acrid temps of smoke from nearby fires. You watch as he makes the sign of the cross repeatedly, each gesture deliberate, almost mechanical, as if in these movements he can anchor himself against the rising tide of anxiety that the plague carries in silence. You realize that pilgrims like him are both messengers and witnesses. They move between towns, carrying prayers and warnings, stories of survival and despair, and sometimes, unknowingly, the seeds of the plague itself. You notice the careful way he steps over the dirt, avoiding puddles and stray animals, pausing at small shrines along the path. These shrines are simpler: rough-hewn cross, a handful of stones, sometimes a faded image painted on wood, but they are focal points, drawing the pilgrim's attention, his energy, and his devotion into something tangible amid uncertainty. As you walk past, you catch glimpses of small items he carries: a pouch of salt, a sprig of rosemary, a few coins tied in a piece of cloth. Each object has a story and a function. Salt is for preservation, rosemary for protection, coins for offerings at the next village. You notice that even in such practical items, faith and survival intertwine. There is a tactile quality to his ritual, the way his hands manipulate objects with both care and necessity, blending devotion with instinct. Children in nearby fields pause to watch him, curious and respectful. While the adults avert their eyes or offer a small nod, you sense a communal understanding, a shared acknowledgement that these journeys, though often solitary, carry weight beyond the individual. They are a bridge between communities, a conduit for messages of both hope and caution. Even the way he breathes slow, deliberate, measured seems to influence the rhythm of the space around him, infusing the quiet path with a sense of careful anticipation. You notice that the pilgrim's prayer is not solely verbal. He pauses to touch stones embedded in the path, to trace patterns in the dirt, and to bow toward distant landmarks. These gestures are small, almost invisible, yet they form a network of intention, linking earth, sky, and human presence in an effort to impose order on an otherwise uncertain world. The rhythm of these actions has a calming effect on you, drawing your attention away from the looming threat of the plague and toward the tangible, deliberate gestures of care and devotion. The path bends, leading you closer to the village outskirts again. You hear the faint echo of bells, carried on the wind, a reminder that the pilgrim's world is not isolated. His prayers mingle with the chimes, a layered chorus of human hope and ritual. You feel the interplay of faith and fear, the way communities rely on both tangible measures, clean water, quarantines, burned herbs, and intangible ones, like prayer, superstition, and tradition, to navigate the uncertainty that surrounds them. Finally, the pilgrim rises to his feet, adjusting his robe, gripping his staff tightly. His eyes lift to the horizon, scanning for distant villages, distant faces, distant signs of life. You follow for a moment, sensing the continuation of his journey, the slow but purposeful movement that carries him forward, step by step, prayer by prayer. In his wake, the path is left quieter, yet the residue of intention remains, a soft imprint of hope amid the persistent shadow of illness and mortality. From here, the focus naturally shifts back to the village, to the streets and households that will feel the first ripple effects of such journeys, and to the ways that daily life negotiates the invisible presence of the plague. The pilgrim's prayer is a bridge, connecting faith, routine, and human resilience, and leading you deeper into the lived experience of a world poised between care and catastrophe. The year is 1348, and the village of Embrun, in southern France, is in the throes of the Black Death. The summer sun beats down on the parched earth as a cloud of dust rises in the distance, heralding the approach of a procession unlike any other. For weeks, the villagers have heard rumors of the flagellants, a holy order of penance who travel from town to town whipping themselves as an act of devotion to God and a prayer for the plague to end. But now that they're here, seeing the spectacle with their own eyes, fear and morbid fascination war within them. Children abandon their games and peek from behind overturned carts and latticed window shutters, while mothers clutch their babies' clothes, huddling in doorways with their faces covered in protective veils. A brave soul steps forward, shielding his eyes against the bright sunlight. His white linen shirt is already stained crimson by the blood of countless flagellants who have come before him. With each step that the procession takes into the village, the crowd instinctively makes way. Though the men are cloaked in rough-spun brown wool, their faces are pale as death and their bodies emaciated. It's clear that these are no corpses animated by some unholy necromancy. Each man is bound to the next by a rope, and together they move like a single writhing beast. Their chant, a litany of lamentation and despair, rises above the crowd. We have deserved this scourge. We have deserved this most grievous pain. Only God knows our sins. Only God knows our pain. Each phrase is punctuated by sharp intake of breath as the men pull back their heads and contort their faces in silent screams. Then the ropes tighten and the men fall forward, pressing their foreheads against the flags that trail behind them. The first flagellant reaches the center of the village. He raises his head and opens his mouth in a silent roar that seems to suck the very breath from the onlooker's lungs. From the depths of his throat he brings forth the blackest blood that ever flowed through human veins, and splattering it against the flag that hangs from his waist, cries out in a voice that is both his own and yet somehow not. We have deserved this scourge. We have deserved this most grievous pain. Only God knows our sins. Only God knows our pain. In perfect unison, the rest of the procession begins to sway from side to side, creating a wave of flailing bodies that crashes over and over again, like the relentless pounding of a blacksmith's hammer. With each movement, more blood is flung from their mouths. painting grotesque murals of suffering on the flags that stream behind them. Still, the crowd stands mesmerized, watching as the men writhe and cry out until the very stones of the village tremble beneath their feet. At last, as if weary of the spectacle, the men come to a halt. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the flagellants raise their heads and turn toward the crowd. One by one, they open their eyes, revealing the whites of their sockets and the depths of their despair. A hush falls over the crowd as the men begin to remove their hoods, revealing the shaven heads and tortured faces of those who have devoted their lives to atoning for the sins of humanity. Then, raising their voices, they begin to chant once more, "Only God knows our sins. Only God knows our pain." As the sound of their chanting grows fainter and fainter, the villagers slowly come out of their hiding places, blinking in the sudden brightness of day. The square is empty now, save for the blood-soaked flags that lie abandoned in the dust. Embrun will never be the same again. For the sight of the flagellants has seared itself into the minds of the villagers, haunting their waking moments and plaguing their dreams. They hurry along the now familiar street, their steps hurried, their eyes downcast. For they cannot forget the hollow sockets that stared back at them from across the square. Nor can they stop the chant rising from the depths of their souls. Only God knows our sins. Only God knows our pain. The camera pans up to reveal a lone figure standing in the top balcony of a nearby building. The stranger's face is hidden beneath his hood, but his eyes gleam with an unholy light as he watches the villagers go about their business. A cruel smile twists his lips as he raises his head and throws back his hood, revealing the face of a corpse. And so the nightmare continues. The Black Death still claims its victims, and the only solace to be found is in the flagellant's promise of divine retribution. Will Embrun ever be free of the plague? Or is it doomed to a never-ending cycle of death and despair? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. So you find yourself in a medieval village during the height of the Black Death. Where do you go for sanctuary? It's easy. You hit up the local tavern. The Black Death is one of history's most gruesome plagues, killing millions across Europe. But as fear gripped the hearts of villagers, they found solace in each other's company at their local tavern. So step into this village tavern and let us talk about what life was like during those terrifying times. When you enter the tavern, you make your way over the threshold and past the heavy wooden door. The sound of the outside world begins to fade away as you leave the cobblestone streets and the chilling reminders of the plague. You re-greeted by the warm glow of a dozen or so oil lamp ambers flickering inside the room, casting dancing shadows on the worn wooden tables and benches scattered around the tavern. Air is thick with the aroma of simmering beef stew, seasoned with rosemary and thyme, mingling with the inviting scent of freshly baked bread. A roaring fire crackles merrily in the hearth, providing not just warmth but also a comforting backdrop to the hushed conversations taking place around you. As you pull up a wobbly wooden chair and bring your mug of ale to your nose, you catch the eye of an elderly farmer. His weathered face etched with the stories of a life well lived, his calloused hands gripping a tankard of cider. He nods his head in silent greeting, his eyes twinkling with a lifetime of experiences. At the next table, a group of merchants from a nearby city, their faces hidden behind their wide-brimmed hats, are sharing tales of their travels. Their voices low, their words carefully chosen as they discuss the dangers that lie along the roads. The dwindling numbers of fellow merchants and the rising prices of goods. One of them, a wiry man with a merchant's sharp eyes, pulls a crumpled piece of parchment from his sleeve and studies it by the light of a sputtering candle. He speaks in hushed tones about an alternative route, one that might lead them to safer markets. In the corner, a bard strums a haunting melody on his lute, his voice echoing the sorrow that has descended upon many a village. Yet there's a hint of defiance in his song, a refusal to be cowed by the darkness that seeks to engulf them. The tavern owner, a stout woman with a no-nonsense air, moves deftly behind the bar, pouring drinks and serving up bread and cheese to those who've come through the door. Her movements are economical, her gaze steady and sure. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps echoes in the suddenly silent room. All eyes turn towards the door as a lone traveler enters, his cloak pulled tightly against the chill of the evening. He looks haggard, his clothes dusty, his face drawn and pale. He moves with a weariness that speaks of long journeys and heavy burdens borne. The newcomer sits down heavily, his shoulders slumped, and orders a mug of ale. As he takes in the somber atmosphere of the tavern, he pulls out a crumpled piece of parchment from his travel-worn cloak and unfolds it carefully. With a grave expression, he begins to read, his voice echoing the urgency of the message. And then, just as suddenly, a peal of children's laughter rings out from beyond the tavern doors. A small group of youngsters, their faces flushed with excitement, peek in through the opening. They're too young to understand the full weight of the plague that's sweeping the countryside. But their parents' worried whispers have still managed to seep into their innocent ears. They exchange glances with the tavern owner, their eyes wide and curious, before darting back out into the twilight, their laughter echoing faintly in the gathering darkness. You watch them go, a small smile tugging at the corners of your lips. For a moment, the tavern is filled with the sounds of quiet conversation, the clinking of tankards, and the crackle of the fire. Then the travelers begin to pack up their belongings, preparing to hit the road once more and brave the dangers of the night. As evening begins to fall, you sit alone in the tavern, the weight of the world pressing down on you. Outside, the wind whispers tales of the plague's relentless advance. But inside, the tavern stands as a beacon of human resilience, a place where people come together and share their stories, their fears, and their hopes for a better tomorrow. For now, you're safe here in this small, dimly lit room, but you know that the Black Death waits for no one. It's an invisible stalker that lurks just beyond the firelight, ready to strike when you least expect it. And so you raise your mug in a silent toast to the simple pleasures of life, the warmth of a full belly, the comfort of a flickering flame, and the quiet strength of community in the face of overwhelming darkness. Because here, in this medieval tavern, amidst the shadow of the Black Death, you found a moment of solace, a brief respite from the horrors that plague the land. And as the night deepens, you realize that this may be all that keeps you going, the promise of another sunrise, and the hope that tomorrow will be better than today. You leave the comforting glow of the tavern behind and move toward the edges of the village, where a smaller, quieter group gathers each evening. The watchmen, a combination of official constables and volunteer villagers, take their posts along the perimeter, scanning the paths, gates, and alleys with careful, deliberate attention. The air here is cooler, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and smoke from distant chimneys. You notice the subtle tension in their movements, the way hands rest lightly on staffs, the tilt of heads following shadows, the quiet communication through nods or low whispers. Even in darkness, the vigilance is precise, almost ritualistic. The watchman's role is both practical and psychological. They mark boundaries, enforce restrictions, and keep track of who comes and goes, but they also serve as a reassurance to the villagers inside. Seeing a familiar face on the gate, a known figure patrolling steadily, gives a subtle sense of order in a world increasingly unpredictable. You notice how they walk in pairs or small groups, spacing themselves so that every corner of the village has an observer, every gate a sentinel, every path a measure of control against the invisible threat that lurks beyond. Their tools are simple but purposeful. Lanterns glow softly in the dusk, casting pools of warm light that illuminate the cobblestones and dirt paths. Some carry staffs or poles, not for combat but for guidance and authority. Others have small satchels containing basic remedies or tokens for signaling neighbors in case of illness or danger. Doors. You observe the careful way they move, soft footsteps, measured pauses, subtle glances, etched action chosen to maintain vigilance without provoking panic. The rhythm of their patrol is almost hypnotic, a steady drumbeat that shapes the night around them. As you follow at a respectful distance, you notice how the watchmen interact with villagers who venture out. A nod here, a whispered instruction there, all delivered with a calm authority that reassures without alarming. There is a subtle choreography at work. The guard on the bridge leans slightly to indicate a safe crossing. The one near the well signals the need to distance from others. The patrol near the outer fields maintains a watchful silence, letting movement alone communicate readiness. It is a language of trust, awareness, and precaution, developed over repeated nights under the quiet pressure of threat. Children peek from windows or doorways, curious and sometimes fearful. And you see the watchman's soft smile or gentle gesture, toward them a recognition that vigilance does not preclude humanity. Even animals seem attuned to the presence of these quiet guardians. pausing mid-step or lifting heads when lantern light swings across a path. There is a rhythm to the night, a balance of movement and stillness, of attention and allowance, that threads the village together under a shared understanding of risk and care. You notice, too, the subtle signs of adaptation. Paths are rearranged for safety, gates are reinforced, and households adjust routines to coincide with patrol schedules. It is a slow, deliberate negotiation between fear and survival. The watchmen do not simply enforce rules, they influence the daily heartbeat of the village, guiding steps, timing tasks, and offering both instruction and reassurance in measured doses. Their presence reshapes ordinary life, giving structure to uncertainty, turning night into a coordinated rhythm of vigilance. The watchmen also carry the weight of observation. They record absences, note who is ill, and occasionally relay urgent information to the village leaders. You sense the invisible burden they bear, balancing duty and empathy, authority and care. The subtle gestures, the quiet warnings, the careful watchfulness, all of it coalesces into a shared shield of presence against an invisible threat. You notice how even in moments of brief respite, when two watchmen exchange a whispered joke or adjust lanterns, the ritual of vigilance never truly ends. It merely softens before resuming with full intensity. As the night deepens and stars begin to pierce the velvet sky, you see the village held in a delicate suspension of safety and uncertainty. The watchmen move steadily, their lanterns bobbing softly, casting shadows that stretch and blend into the still air. You feel the reassurance of continuity, the subtle order imposed upon a chaotic world, and the human determination that persists even in the quietest, most uncertain hours. From their careful patrol, your attention begins to drift toward the interiors of homes, the whispered precautions of families, and the routines that keep life moving within walls, leading naturally toward the next chapter where domestic vigilance becomes its own quiet art. You step out of the shadowed streets patrolled by the watchmen and make your way toward the heart of the village, the market square. Normally a hub of noise, color, and the mingling sense of fresh bread, herbs, and livestock, today it feels muted, almost suspended in a strange, cautious silence. Stalls that would once overflow with produce and wares are sparsely populated, and vendors call their greetings in low, careful tones, their hands held away from coins and goods as though even the air carries unseen danger. The sun falls at a gentle angle, casting long, soft shadows across empty cobblestones, and you notice the faint whisper of the wind as it carries the aroma of distant hearths into the square. Walking among the deserted stalls, you see small signs of adaptation. Cloth coverings, shield goods from dust, and baskets are rotated to avoid too much handling. Traders have learned to keep conversations brief, nodding more than speaking, exchanging what is essential with deliberate economy. The market's usual rhythm, dance of bargaining, laughter, and storytelling has been replaced with a quieter, almost meditative tempo. Every movement seems intentional, measured, a careful negotiation between necessity and caution. Even the animals tethered nearby seem subdued, their soft rustlings blending into the hush that blankets the square. You notice that the fading market is more than an economic center. It is a reflection of the community's resilience. Families who would once have gathered here for social connection now pass through swiftly, exchanging small nods or gentle waves. The scents of herbs, bread, and wood smoke mingle, grounding the square in sensory familiarity even as its vibrancy wanes. It is a space caught between routine and disruption, where survival has reshaped tradition into something quieter, smaller, yet still recognizably human. You pause near a stall, observing a merchant carefully arranging her wares: dried beans, onions, and a few misshapen apples, and notice the subtle pride in the act, small insistence on normalcy despite the world outside. The fading market also carries hints of ingenuity. You spot small notes pinned to posts, instructions for neighbors about times for collection, warnings about infected households, and guidance on safe transactions. The community has built a new language of precaution directly into the marketplace, integrating survival into ordinary routines. There is a gentle creativity to these adjustments, a quiet demonstration of human adaptability. The way hands move quickly yet deliberately, the eyes scanning for proximity, the soft nods exchanged, All speak to a rhythm that blends vigilance with the desire for continuity. Even the sunlight seems to play a role in this adaptation. It falls softly across empty tables, illuminating scattered coins, the faint dust motes rising in lazy spirals from the cobbles. You notice how colors appear dulled, the reds of apples and cloth muted, the greens of herbs softened by distance and awareness. It is as though the plague has imposed a filter on the world, encouraging subtle observation over hasty judgment, attentiveness over indulgence. You inhale the smells of bread, wood smoke, and faint earthiness, letting the sensory cues anchor you in the rhythm of the market, even as activity ebbs. Children, usually running between stalls and laughing, now move slowly at their parents' sides, their curiosity tempered by cautious instruction. You hear the occasional whispered question, the low replies of adults, emphasizing safety and distance. Even play is constrained, shaped by the unseen threat lingering beyond the square. Yet, in these small gestures, a hesitant hand touch, a quiet game of observation. A soft, shared glance, life continues, finding expression in micro moments of care and connection. As the afternoon wanes, vendors begin packing up, lifting canvas coverings, stacking empty baskets, and guiding their animals home. The square empties gradually, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the soft whisper of wind through deserted stalls. You feel the lingering sense of human presence, of routines maintained even in quiet desperation. A subtle insistence that life adapts, persists, and finds a way forward. From the fading market, your gaze drifts toward the narrow lanes leading into private homes, where domestic routines now dominate, and where the next chapter awaits. The ways households have reshaped themselves into small fortresses of precaution, care, and quiet resilience. You slip along the narrow lanes that branch off the fading market, noticing the subtle changes that plague has wrought in the rhythm of village life. Doors are slightly ajar, but only enough to hear the muffled conversations inside. And windows are opened, just a crack, allowing light and occasional whispers to escape. The air is heavy with the scent of smoke from hearths and the faint tang of herbs hung to ward off sickness. It is here, in these intimate spaces, that rumors flourish. You overhear snippets carried through the lanes, a neighbor claiming to have seen someone survive a particularly severe fever, a merchant speculating on where the plague came from, a mother quietly instructing her children about invisible dangers. Each whisper seems to carry weight, folded into gestures, nods, and sidelong glances. The village thrives on the rhythm of information, however imperfect, and in the absence of certainty, these whispers become a form of navigation through a world where the familiar has grown strangely hazardous. As you move closer to a cluster of homes, you notice the care with which people speak, the pauses to ensure only intended ears hear. Words are measured, neither shouted nor hurried, a cadence that mirrors the cautious steps taken in daily chores. You hear about remedies, both practical and speculative, herbal concoctions, vinegar washes, or prayers recited at specific hours. Some advice is repeated, carefully rehearsed, while other suggestions seem improvised, born of observation or desperation. There is a gentle tension in these exchanges, hope and fear intermingled, fact and fantasy dancing together in the same breath. The whispers are not merely idle talk, they shape behavior. You see doors closed at precise moments, meals timed around patrols, children guided along different paths to avoid congregating with others. The rumors influence what is touched, what is avoided, and when. Even the positioning of livestock and storage of food seems affected by tales of contamination, of sickness transmitted in ways that cannot always be proven but are treated as true nonetheless. Life becomes a careful choreography, guided by information that is simultaneously comforting and alarming. You notice the small power these whispered rumors hold. A statement made quietly to one neighbor can ripple outward, altering routines and perceptions. People nod in agreement, repeat the phrases in slightly altered forms, or whisper corrections and clarifications. The rhythm of communication itself takes on a subtle authority, more influential than the clanging of bells or the formal instructions from the village leaders. The human mind, attuned to survival, leans instinctively into these faint, shared signals of caution. Children, too, are conduits for rumor. repeating fragments of adult conversation with innocent mispronunciations that nevertheless carry meaning. You watch a young girl pass along a tale about a family who claimed to be protected by certain prayers or herbs, her eyes wide with curiosity and mild trepidation. Adults listen, smile faintly, or murmur their own doubts, but rarely do they interrupt the flow. The whispers become part of the ambient texture of life, as subtle and persistent as the wind through the eaves. Even the architecture of the homes seems to amplify these murmurs. Narrow alleyways funnel sound, open windows carry conversation further than intended, and walls thin enough to permit the smallest sound turn casual observations into communal knowledge. You begin to sense the intimate interweaving of human connection. Rumor and survival house information, even imperfect, serves as both guide and comfort. As night approaches, the whispers soften, blending with the occasional crackle of hearths and the quiet hum of wind through the village. You can feel the cumulative effect of these whispered rumors, a web of vigilance, shared wisdom, and cautious imagination that shapes life in ways both practical and emotional. They are the unseen scaffolding that supports community cohesion, even when fear runs high and certainty is scarce. As the Black Death ravaged medieval Europe, entire communities were wiped out, their stories lost to history. But wait, rewind. Here in this village, life and death are being meticulously recorded in a massive communal project. A community under siege is creating an archive, chronicling every aspect of their world in painstaking detail. This is a story about medieval villagers, those whose lives were most affected by the plague, and the vital work they did to preserve their collective memory. Welcome to Medieval Village Chronicles, where we bring you new episodes every Thursday. In our series, The Sacred Work, the community of a medieval village in the heart of England has come together in a massive effort to document every aspect of their world, from the mundane to the profound. For centuries, such chronicles were the domain of monks and scriptoriums. But here in the village, literacy is widespread, and the quill and the scroll have replaced the monk's cowl and breviary. Now, under the direction of the village elder, men and women are coming together in the quiet corner of a room, away from the chaos of the plague, to record all they see and hear around them. They take down the names of those who are sick and those who have died, as well as the prices of goods at the market and the size of the harvest. But they are also recording more subtle things, like when people avoid one another on the road, or which households have become isolated because of the plague. They are even noting which shops are still open and which supplies are still available, while seemingly trivial. These details provide a window into the inner lives of the villagers and the intricate workings of their community. This work is dangerous. Every adult in the village knows that the plague has robbed many a scribe of their life before reaching the end of their story. And yet someone must do this sacred work. For what is a community without its memory? As the chronicler sits down to work each day, he or she dips their quill into ink and makes a prayer for guidance, for wisdom, and for protection. After all, there are few things more dangerous than a book in the time of plague. Now our chronicler is paying close attention to something extraordinary. He notices that some villagers are shunning the sick, leaving food outside the doors of their quarantined neighbors, rather than risk contracting the disease. He also observes which families are volunteering their members to help care for the sick and to bury the dead. He writes down the names of those who step forward, for these people will be heroes in the story of the plague. Our chronicler has heard that the village priest has altered the burial ritual, so that the body of the deceased is not carried to the graveyard by family members. Instead, a small group of volunteers is designated to do this task. He watches as the priest steps back from the bier, allowing 2 men in full PPE to carry the coffin. Such changes may seem small, but they are significant in the story of the plague. By recording them, our chronicler is helping to preserve the traditions of his community in the face of an unrelenting crisis. And that's all for this episode of Medieval Village Chronicles. Join us next week as we continue to explore the world of a medieval village in crisis and the vital work of those who are working to preserve their history. As the last rays of sun stretched and waned across the village square, so too did the shadows lengthen on the faces of its people. They had gathered in their finest, or perhaps only clothes, their heads bowed under the weight of unspoken fears and sorrows. At the far end of the cobblestone street, the village priest stepped into the open, his hand raised in solemn greeting to the east. Behind him, a pair of flagellants, their bodies scarred and hair matted with sweat and dirt, adjusted their leather straps, ready to begin their dance. It was an ancient ritual, one that predated even the oldest stories told around hearths, and now forgotten by most of the world. It was called the Dance of Death, and it was a desperate attempt to stave off the plague that stalked their kind. This was a medieval village on the brink of fear and despair. All around were the trappings of a dying world, the smell of overripe garbage mingling with the coppery tang of blood and death. And every day, the toll of knell grew heavier, taking not just the old or the weak, but the strong and the pure of heart, too. But still they danced, the clergy, the flagellants, and the elders, their measured steps echoing the relentless beat of the reaper's scythe. Their eyes, though, were fixed on some unseen point beyond the rooftops, where perhaps the angel of death held court. They moved like moths to a flame, or rather like moths to a funeral pyre, drawing ever closer to the heart of darkness. Twice they circled the square, the sound of their measured steps swallowed by the towering stone walls and the eaves of the houses. Twice they paused, once at the doors of the ancient church, where the priest offered up a prayer to the Almighty for the health of the village. Then again before the village fountain, where the purity of water was blessed and sprinkled upon the bowed heads of the people. And a third time at the foot of the village cross, where the shadow of sacrifice had fallen long ago. Here they left their burdens at the foot of the rough-hewn wood, and took heart from the steadfastness of their Savior, nailed and unyielding. But even in this solidarity of suffering there was a terrible beauty, a grim determination in the set of their shoulders and the measured rise and fall of their chests as they breathed in the steady thuds of their sandals on the packed earth and worn stone. There was no hysteria here, no panic, only the cold, hard knowledge that they were dancing with the devil himself, and he had claimed many of their number already. Behind them, the villagers maintained their distance, careful not to break their ranks, yet close enough to share in the silent, terrible strength of their neighbors. Some dabbed at their eyes with soiled handkerchiefs. Others clutched at their children, pulling them close, shielding them from the sight of the ghoulish dancers. Yet even the youngest of the village knew this day was set aside for mourning and remembrance, a day when the veil between the worlds was thinnest and the dead walked among the living. So they mimicked the protective gestures of the adults, the crossing of themselves, the deep bows of their heads, the measured steps forward and back. They were learning, these children, the hard way that life and death were inextricably bound together, that joy and sorrow were partners in a macabre waltz, and that the only constant in this world was change itself. And so the dance went on, the litany of loss, grief, and despair, yet also of hope, faith, and endurance. The dancers moved as one, their bodies swaying slightly, their arms brushing ever so lightly, and yet never touching, never breaking the sacred geometry of their sorrow. And in the pauses between the movements, they murmured prayers under their breath, each word a whispered plea to the powers that be for mercy and grace. Some clutched small bundles of herbs, their scents mingling in the twilight air. Sage and lavender, rosemary and thyme, each leaf and flower carefully dried and bundled to ward off the unseen. Others wore charms around their necks or wrists, relics of saints or holy symbols, talismans against the evil eye, anything to keep the darkness at bay. And as the dancers moved through the village, so the villagers moved through their day, each person lost in their own thoughts, each family preparing for their own private vigils. By nightfall, the whole village would be cloaked in the smell of incense and the soft glow of candlelight, each home a sanctuary against the encroaching dark. When the procession finally reached the edge of town, the sky was the color of old bruises, and the first stars pricked the darkening canvas like pinpricks of blood. The dancers fell silent, their faces turned upward to where the moon hung like a silver sickle in the bruised sky. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, with a final prayer on their lips, the villagers dispersed, each returning to the safety of their homes. They had danced with death, and for now they had won. You turn away from the echoes of the village square, where the dance of death has just dissolved into quiet streets, and you move toward the corners where the beaked figures make their occasional unsettling appearances. They are the plague doctors, dressed in long dark robes, gloves, and the signature bird-like masks that curve sharply at the nose. From a distance, the sight seems theatrical. It's almost like characters from a traveling morality play, yet you quickly recognize the seriousness behind their attire. The masks are stuffed with aromatic herbs, cloves, and other substances intended to ward off the invisible disease. A mixture of superstition, early science, and desperation. The air carries their faintly medicinal scent, sharp and pungent, mingling with the lingering smoke of hearths and the soft dust of cobblestones. As you observe them moving along narrow lanes, you notice the precision in their steps. Each visit to a household is methodical. A polite knock, a brief inspection, perhaps a whispered question, and always careful handling of whatever objects they encounter. The long robes sweep the ground, muffling footfalls, and the gloved hands avoid direct contact unless necessary. There is a quiet choreography to their work, a combination of authority, caution, and ritual. Villagers, from a respectful distance, watch with a mixture of curiosity, relief, and subtle apprehension. The presence of the beaked figures marks both hope and fear, a reminder of danger and the possibility of guidance. The design of their masks and attire reflects the beliefs of the time. You notice the elongated beak, intended to hold aromatic substances, almost as if carrying a small garden into the household. The eyes are covered with dark lenses, reducing exposure to the unknown. There is a rhythm to their gestures, lifting a lantern, adjusting the mask, consulting notes that seem strangely soothing once you attune to it. Even in the midst of fear, their movements are deliberate and calm, a visual counterpoint to the chaos of invisible illness. Their presence reassures some, while inspiring a respectful distance in others, shaping the way villagers navigate their own domestic spaces. You watch as a beaked figure pauses at a doorway, the slight tilt of the head indicating consideration and assessment. The herbs in the mask release faint vapors that drift into the narrow street, adding another layer of sensory detail to the evening air. You sense that, in these careful visits, the doctors perform more than medicine. They perform an act of structure, giving shape to the unmanageable and lending authority where uncertainty reigns. The villagers' response is equally ritualistic. Hands are washed repeatedly, tools set aside, and whispered instructions pass through windows, creating a quiet feedback loop of precaution, observation, and mutual recognition. Even the children are aware of the beaked figures. They peek from behind shutters or run briefly to catch a glimpse, fascinated by the exaggerated shapes and long robes, while adults remind them to maintain distance. The mask, almost grotesque in appearance, becomes a symbol of vigilance, a reminder of both danger and the rituals designed to counter it. You note how these figures influence village movement. Streets are temporarily cleared, work slows, and households adjust routines around their presence. As the evening deepens, the beaked figures move on, their long shadows stretching across cobblestones, leaving behind a mixture of relief and lingering tension. The aroma of herbs remains, blending with the cool night air and the quiet murmur of villagers discussing the visit in low voices. There is a subtle lesson in their passage, even in fear. Careful observation, ritual, and deliberate action can provide structure, reassurance, and a sense of safety. You step into the quieter corners of the village, where the echoes of the streets have softened and the hum of daily survival becomes more intimate. Here, children still find ways to move, laugh, and explore. Even beneath the shadow of the Black Death, their games are smaller, quieter, but no less inventive. They weave between narrow alleyways, hop over cobblestones, and spin around the bases of posts, venting invisible boundaries and gentle rules. The laughter is restrained, like a soft bell in a dim room, fragile but persistent. A signal that life continues despite the pervasive caution that guides adult movements. You notice the way children adapt. They play with simple objects. A tin cup becomes a makeshift drum, stick transforms into a sword, a discarded piece of cloth becomes a cape. Imagination fills the gaps left by what adults have restricted, and the games carry a rhythm that mirrors the village itself, calculated, careful, and subtly attentive to danger. They avoid gatherings that would attract attention or inadvertently brush against surfaces deemed risky. Yet they do so with creativity rather than fear, turning constraint into a quiet form of play. Their footsteps are measured but energetic, a reminder of the resilience of youth. Even the lessons of survival are embedded in their games. One child counts steps along safe paths, another teaches a younger sibling to wash hands before touching shared toys, and a small group whispers about herbs and protective charms passed down from adults. Observation, mimicry, and gentle instruction are as much part of play as running or chasing. The children internalize the rules of caution without formal lectures. It is absorbed naturally, like sunlight filtered through leaves. You sense that these games are both education and amusement, a blending of instinct, creativity, and adaptation. Parents watch from doorways or windows, their eyes soft yet vigilant. They offer small nods, gentle corrections, and quiet reassurance, allowing freedom within boundaries. The soundscape of play is punctuated by these muted interjections, a rhythm of oversight that maintains safety while nurturing joy. You notice that the children's interactions with each other are nuanced sharing, negotiating turns, and forming small alliances mirroring the careful social patterns adults now follow in every public and private space. The environment itself shapes the play. Narrow lanes, low walls, and sun-dappled courtyards provide natural boundaries, creating spaces where risk is minimized and imagination can flourish. You watch a group chase a rolling hoop along a sloped path, the sunlight glinting off the metal rim, laughter soft and continuous. Even in these constrained surroundings, the joy of motion, the thrill of discovery, and the inventiveness of youth persist. You notice the subtle ways children help the community adapt, child carrying small bundles of herbs, or assisting in the preparation of simple meals reflects lessons. Absorbed through observation, demonstrating that even play can reinforce resilience. The act of moving, observing, and interacting with peers creates a rhythm of life that sustains both body and spirit. A small counterpoint to the fear and careful calculation that dominates adult routines. As the day wanes, the laughter slows, replaced by whispered conversations and quiet steps back toward home. Toys are gathered, chalk drawings fade under footsteps, and games are paused for supper and evening prayers. The traces of play linger, small gestures of joy, faint echoes of movement, and the imprint of resilience that children leave in the spaces they inhabit. As darkness falls on a medieval village in the year 1348, the air grows heavy with the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. The day has been hot, but the late afternoon shadows are growing long, and the cobblestones have had time to cool. Men, women, and children make their way home from the fields and the shops, their steps echoing softly in the stillness. Some homes have empty stalls, shuttered windows and bolted doors, signs that their inhabitants have fallen victim to the sickness that has been stalking the land. Life in the village has been irrevocably altered by the Black Death. Fearful eyes watch every cough and fever. The lively chatter of the marketplace has been replaced by hushed conversations. But the world must go on. Seasons do not care for pestilence, and the needs of the living still must be met. So the villagers of our story set about their tasks with a mixture of caution and resolve, adapting to the new rhythms of life under the shadow of death. The farmers tread carefully in their smaller plots, keeping a sharp eye out for signs of illness in themselves and others. Where once there were 3 or 4 to a team, now there are only 2. Working in tandem, they observe the rows of ripening grain with an almost reverent hush. For they know that each handful of seed they tend may one day feed the hungry mouths of their village. In the square, the air is thick with the aroma of fresh bread. From his small shop, the baker watches families approach, their faces hidden behind simple cloth masks. He has learned that flour and water, yeast and salt can bring a semblance of normalcy to these troubled times. And as he kneads the dough, he knows that each loaf he pulls from the oven is a small victory against the encroaching darkness. Nearby, at the well, a young girl draws water, her movements as careful and precise as if she were conducting an ancient ritual. Her father, the village blacksmith, watches her with quiet pride. For now, she is too young to learn the trade. But soon, she will take her place beside him, helping to shape the village's tools and weapons with the same strong arms that now pump water from the well. And as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village green, the villagers gather in small groups, their voices hushed but resolute. They speak not only in whispers, for to do so is both a sign of respect for the dead and a prayer for the living. They discuss how to proceed in a world forever changed, sharing stories and strategies for coping with the sudden shortage of workers, the empty stalls in the marketplace, and the ever-present fear of contagion. In this moment of shared vulnerability, they find strength in each other's company, drawing comfort from the simple act of existing when so many around them have been called away. A mother hums a gentle tune as she helps her daughter braid her hair, the rhythmic clatter of the loom providing a steady backdrop to their evening ritual. As the flames of their hearth dance, they share tales of the old ways, remembering a time before the plague, when their world was filled with the laughter of children and the bustle of a thriving community. The weight of the day's labor finally lifts as the tools are set aside, and the villagers turn their thoughts to rest. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil gives way to the soft crackle of evening fires. In the gathering dusk, they find solace in the simple routine of their lives, a quiet satisfaction that comes from a day's work well done, testament to the enduring spirit of humanity in the face of life's uncertainties. They eat their evening meals in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they slowly digest the day's events. Some pray for the sick, others for the strength to endure. Still others simply give thanks for the blessing of another day. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and the low murmur of voices. The stars begin to appear one by one in the inky sky above, a silent audience to the drama unfolding below. For in this moment of quiet contemplation, the villagers are not just surviving, they are adapting, learning, and growing. They are discovering new strengths within themselves and their communities. And as they drift off to sleep, they do so with the faintest glimmer of hope that tomorrow will bring not just another day, but a chance to rebuild, to heal, and perhaps even to hope again. The village is waking up. It has been a long winter, but the sun is insistent, and the people are resilient. They have endured, they have suffered, but now life is beginning to stir once more. And though the wounds of the past are still fresh, hope is a fragile flower pushing through the cracks in the stone. As the sun begins its slow descent, the sky awash with hues of amber and rose, the cobblestone streets come alive with cautious steps. It is the hour of twilight, the time when the veil between the world of men and the whispers of the old ways grows thin. And so the villagers emerge from their homes with quiet reverence, their faces etched with the wisdom of hard-won experience. Parents hold their children's hands not too tightly, for the innocence of childhood must endure, but enough to ensure their little ones stay close. The air is filled with the scent of wood smoke and baking bread mingling with the sweet laughter of children playing. It is a sound that was almost forgotten, a melody that almost died, but now it rings out once more, carried on the gentle breeze. In the central plaza, life is stirring. Stalls are being carefully arranged, displaying wares that were almost lost to the darkness. A merchant arranges his bolts of cloth with a reverence born of loss. Each fold and crease a prayer that the world will keep turning. His weathered hands move with a slow precision, fingers tracing the patterns and textures as if memorizing them for a future without him. Beside him, an old woman with eyes that hold the secrets of the ages weighs out dried herbs, her gnarled hands working with a lifetime of practiced ease. Her stall, a riot of colors and scents, offers more than just remedies for the body. Each leaf and petal holds a whisper of magic, a testament to the enduring strength of the earth and the resilience of life. A young mother approaches, her steps hesitant. Then, a tentative smile breaks across her face as she exchanges a loaf of bread for a handful of fragrant mint. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plaza, the villagers gather, not in crowds, but in small clusters, sharing stories and news in hushed tones. There is a quiet understanding in their eyes, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. An old man with a white beard that flows like a frozen waterfall sits on a nearby bench, his gaze steady and sharp despite his age. He watches the scene before him with a mixture of sadness and pride. He remembers a time when the village square teemed with life, when the laughter of children echoed freely and the air vibrated with the energy of a thriving community. But those memories are now bittersweet, a reminder of what was lost and what must be reclaimed. As dusk deepens, candles are lit, not with the careless abandon of days gone by, but with a reverence born of hard-won experience. In the flickering light, faces are etched with the wisdom of survival, their eyes reflecting the strength it took to endure. Murmured prayers, small and personal, are offered, not as desperate pleas, but as quiet thanks. Some hang charms and wards in their doorways, not out of desperation, but as a nod to tradition. It's a way of honoring the past without surrendering to fear. And then there are the children, playing in the fading light, their laughter like the chiming of bells, each note resonating with the joy of simply being alive. They play at being hunters and gatherers, mimicking the movements of their ancestors with wooden swords and makeshift bows and arrows. Their eyes, wide with wonder and excitement, reflect the innocence of youth, a reminder of the beauty that life can still hold. The adults watch from their doorways, a smile touching their lips, a tear glistening in their eyes. They see in these children the hope for a future, a chance for the world to turn right side up again. For now, this moment of unadulterated joy is all they can ask for. And so the village breathes, a slow, cautious breath, but a breath nonetheless. They have endured the long winter, faced the darkness, and emerged, battered but unbroken. Now they walk forward into the golden light of the setting sun, their steps lighter, their spirits stronger, honoring the memory of those they have lost, weaving vigilance and hope into the fabric of their daily lives. As you settle into the quiet of your room, perhaps with a soft blanket wrapped around your shoulders and the faint hum of a fan in the background, it is worth reflecting on the journey through the village and the shadow of the Black Death. You have walked cobblestone, streets heavy with history, witnessed rituals both public and private, and observed the careful, persistent rhythms of survival. In every step, every whispered prayer, every cautious game played by children, there was a thread of resilience, small, quiet, and enduring. The horrors of the plague were real, yet so too was the human capacity to adapt, to organize, and to find comfort and structure amid uncertainty. From the tolling bells to the beaked figures, from children's laughter to the slow return of work and community, the story of the village is not only one of loss, but also one of enduring ingenuity. Life continued in incremental gestures, washing hands, tending gardens, observing boundaries, telling stories, and teaching the young. These small acts carried the weight of both survival and hope. Perhaps the most comforting thought is that this pattern is not so different from our own experiences of disruption and uncertainty. Human beings, even in the face of invisible threats, find ways to sustain routines, to connect, and to nurture one another. The past becomes a mirror, showing that perseverance, creativity, and care for others are timeless forms of protection. As the village adapted, so do we, in our own ways, layering rituals and habits that shape our daily lives and our communities. As the world outside your window settles into quiet, let yourself drift with the rhythm of the village. The soft steps on cobblestones, the faint scent of herbs and smoke, the gentle lull of evening. Let the lessons of resilience, observation, and care settle with you, comforting and steady as you drift towards sleep. The villagers, the children at play, the careful hands of laborers all become companions in a timeless journey, reminding you that even in shadows, life finds ways to persist. Good night.